How's the literacy curriculum organised in the regime of authentic pedagogy? Well, I think we've covered a fair bit of that already in terms of, but just to make some generalisations now, it's about natural learning, it's about relevant learning, it's about meaningful learning, it's about motivation. So what kinds of motivations were there or are there in didactic pedagogy? Well, the motivation is, I put up my hand and the teacher says, yes, that's right. Well, that's kind of affirming. It's classic behaviourist psychology. And at the end of the week, I get 9 out of 10 for my test. At the end of the semester, I get A+. And this is called extrinsic motivation, which is kind of around scores and around doing well in the system. It's about a kind of a managerial or administrative form of motivation, if you like. Whereas the focus of authentic pedagogy is more what's called, in psychological terms, intrinsic motivation. I'm enjoying reading this book, and I'm proud of this piece of writing that I did. So it's about the intrinsic motivations around literacy as a task or literacy as an activity.
This new approach, what we call progressivist pedagogy, moves away from the authoritarian teacher to the authoritative teacher, and turns students into engaged participants in their learning rather than recipients. And that's what we mean when we say student-centered, that the students' prior knowledge, the students' engagement processes, and the students' outcomes are what the teacher focuses on as they transform learners, rather than have we moved through the chapters or have we moved through all the grammar exercises that we need to engage with. So what does it mean in terms of the ecology of the classroom? Well, if we take content, for example, what kind of choices will we make for any kind of literacy exercise? Will we go to a text that the child has never seen or hasn't heard? Or will we take a text that comes from the real world of the child and is actually related to their experience? Within the progressivist pedagogy, the idea is that the more the content is familiar to the students, more part of their everyday world, the more willing they will be or motivated to engage. So that means that your curriculum is not a fixed curriculum. It needs to be organised in a flexible kind of way and needs to follow the natural growth of the learner. And it has to be the objects of the curriculum, the content of it has to be recognisable to the student and not very far away from their understanding. If we go to ways of learning literacy in the classroom, obviously harnessing interest and doing things that are linked to everyday life is very important for engaging with meaning making. Again, in the learning of literacy, it's bringing new literacy goals, but framing them in terms of what the learner has understood in order to take them to higher order literacy performance.
What does it mean practically about what we're doing in this kind of pedagogy? Well, look, practically, when we're doing literacy, we've got students as very active learners, we've got them as experiential learners, we've got them immersed in reading texts and immersed in the process of writing as a kind of a craft activity. And we've got students who ideally are motivated by the intrinsic interest in what they're doing, the books that they're reading or the writing that they're doing. But often the underlying assumptions are not really terribly diverse. It's still a certain singular idea of literacy. It's still the national form of the language. It's still a certain form of standard English which gets you through tests and so on. So sometimes, even though all these things are built in around relevance and motivation, it's still about getting it right and learning this one standard form of the language.
So how do we relate to the texts and the kinds of texts that might be used in the classroom? It's texts that are brought in because they are model texts, but there's also a lot of self-expression. Learners speaking, reading, writing, expressing themselves, and the artifacts of their expression are as equally important as the texts that are brought in through the curriculum. And this is a huge shift in the way in which pedagogy is understood to allow for the canon, so to speak, to be expanded in this way. And ways of learning, whatever the goal is, within the context of authentic pedagogy, the teacher in a student-centered approach will be always trying to engage the learner by creating learning experiences that are motivational. How do you bring the learner into understanding and the pleasure of learning, and the freedom to learn rather than the requirement to learn? I think all good educators understand you can't force anybody to learn anything. You can force them to remember, you can force them to repeat, but you can't force people to learn. Learning is an internal process that comes with understanding, with meaning making, and with expression, becoming something. So progressive pedagogy was and authentic literacy emerged as the world needed citizens, learners and workers that were able to engage with each other, solve problems, work in more complex environments. It was the way in which democracy could be fulfilled in the new era in which these ideas came forward. Dewey and others understood that if you wanted learners to perform at higher orders, in a world where choice was becoming much more open to them, where their fate was not determined by their past, you had to engage them fully in the learning process and to connect learning to the life that they were actually living. So again, here what we're seeing is an enactment of what we've been saying through this program, that learners come to school to live as well as learn. What will the nature of that living be? In didactic pedagogy, that living was very constrained by the pedagogy, by the curriculum, by the kind of choices that were made. Within progressivist and authentic pedagogy, the living stretches and allows the child in to be part of meaning making and to be co-designers to some degree of their learning.